Ready for AI to do your shopping? It might be closer than you think. This week on the WPP Media Intelligence podcast, we're exploring the reality of agentic commerce and what it means for brands. We'll also unpack the latest economic signals and bank earnings and their ripple effect on media budgets, and the ever-changing landscape of app advertising. And finally, we'll look at how the World Cup is looking to leverage TikTok's global reach. Let's get into it. You're listening to the Media Intelligence Podcast from WPP Media. I'm Kate Scott-Dawkins with Jeff Foster and Nidhi Shah on the Business Intelligence team. And each week, we unpack the biggest stories in media and marketing and why they matter for brands. This week, we have two very special guests. Brian Wieser, my predecessor, and Luke Stillman from Madison and Wall are joining us today. Welcome.
Hello, Kate. Hello, Nidhi. Hello, Jeff. We're so glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us, everyone.
This is a super pod, like a max pod with everyone in the world of forecasting and the advertising world. This is great.
Everyone who matters, at least. And yes, to our listeners here at Madison Wall, this is sort of a crossover pod because you're hearing this on the Madison Wall podcast feed too.
Yes, you give your own intro. This is, I don't know how we do. Next time we'll do it, we'll start with your intro and we'll be the guests. It's going to be great.
We mostly just scream.
That's a more common state of affairs, I think, today than most people would like to admit. All right, well, let's start with agentic commerce. This week, Sundar Pichai himself showed up at the National Retail Federation conference to announce Google's Universal Commerce Protocol, a way for brands to connect with agents and enable agentic commerce within Google properties like AI mode on search. Now, this is similar to OpenAI's Agentic Commerce Protocol, which has support from Stripe, and my understanding, therefore, tied more closely to its integration of the protocol, but basically two different ways of enabling agentic commerce. Have you done any looks at this in the world of ad revenue, Brian and Luke?
Luke has.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the way things are going in commerce, but I think our broad take is we're skeptical that it's going to move how a lot of the money is spent, where a lot of the dollars flow in the commerce ecosystem. Consumers are way more flexible and have far fewer restraints than enterprises do on how they spend, how they interact with commerce. And no consumers are letting AI agents do their shopping for them today. So I think we're going to have tons of runway between consumers engaging on their end and advertisers significantly moving how they're approaching commerce or where they're allocating budgets or really giving over some of that budget execution authority that right now they want to hold on to.
The logic I would throw in, and Kate, you'll remember this from the amazing podcast This Week, Next Week, all advertising is a least bad alternatives business. And if you are spending money in a retail media environment, this is what I focus on. The money won't change unless the vast majority of activity became robot to robot, which we don't think is going to happen. Marketers are still going to keep spending money just as they have. They will lose profits for the sake of maintaining share as long as they're better off for spending money. And that's really the focus that we tend to have when we look at it.
Well, that's what we wrote in December's This Year, Next Year. We were definitely talking about commerce at that time. I do think that segment of the industry is likely to get disrupted even to a larger extent than search. So we'll deal with commerce first. I do think it's that middle second or third tier of retail players that are at greater risk, right? They have less chance of getting people to come to their site and be exposed to retail media inventory on their owned and operated property if people are starting those searches within agents and chatbots instead, right? Amazon will be fine. Walmart will be fine, right? There are multiple CPG companies spending, or, where Walmart represents between 10 and 20-something% of their sales. Those relationships are going to be fine. But it's those second, third tier players which may see a disruption. Now, no one mentioned search, right? Interestingly, search is, by our estimates, expected to be more than $270 billion this year. Even if OpenAI announced ads today, right? We could see a world where they get to like 0.1, 0.3% of that as a share within just search and intelligence more broadly this year, which would be maybe call it at a base case $500 million or something this year, which not necessarily significant as a share shift from Google, but potentially quite significant to OpenAI in terms of continuing to find revenue streams for their business. And I would just offer the reference point that by our estimates, Netflix accounted for about 0.1 to 0.3% of total TV revenue in their first full year of operations.
Do you think that there's any legs to the idea that non-endemics can see a real rationale for spending money in retail media environments. There's been this dream, I remember going back a decade and more, that the auto industry would spend a ton of money in retail media, that financial services would spend a ton of money. I don't think it's happened, or it's not at scale anyways.
It's a good question. I mean, if you look at where Amazon's biggest presence was at CES, and you and I were both there, and Luke as well, it was in the North Hall or the West Hall. It was in the auto segment of CES. They are still making, I mean, if you look at Amazon's sales of autos on Amazon, you could argue that automotive is endemic to Amazon now. I don't think that's a very big part of their business. I do think they've also played around with things like in their interactive TV ads where they have not just click to add to cart, but also now like click your remote to learn more, right? So they're definitely trying to enable that. Again, they're the biggest in this field. They have a lot of impetus in looking for new areas of growth beyond, say, CPGs and other endemic advertisers.
That's fair. I'd forgotten you can buy a car on Amazon. Has anyone done yet? Anyone want to try doing it right now?
Not yet, not yet. I think the challenge is both the commerce data is so valuable that for all those non-endemic verticals, it's hard when you're competing with the CPG companies and the, personal care, toys, electronics companies, that it's worth so much more to them. And also for the consumer experience, I don't think any commerce platform has really figured out, because most of our ad revenue is product listing ads, how do we integrate an auto ad into that or something else without disrupting the consumer experience?
Yeah, everything has to be value add for consumers. That's going to be the same with, the universal protocol on Google. The idea is you're going to be able to buy seamlessly through something like Google's AI mode and search. The checkout will happen without you having to leave the site. Information will still be passed through to the retailer, but even looking at the very early data on this, it was a bit unclear as to, how exactly returns and post-purchase support were going to happen. So open questions. It does remind me of a post I saw from Daniel Hulme at Satalia, part of the WPP family this week, talking about the Google announcement and how brands are becoming an interface in this world. They're designing agent experiences alongside user experiences on their own owned and operated platforms. And that's just an added, I would say, use for agencies, if we're going to get into that, but also a lot for them to be thinking about in this new world of commerce. Has anyone bought anything with AI before we move on? I'm just curious. Researched purchase decisions with AI?
Researched, certainly. Not
Okay.
given over any purchase control yet.
I remember my first conversations on this topic like a decade ago. The idea that your Nespresso machine would pre-order pods based on what you're consuming, based on what you like, where the deals are, or whatever. Well, I mean, I would do that. I would happily do that. It would make a ton of sense because I don't use the espresso pod, but the point is that the coffee machine should be able to be connected and should be able to identify, oh, I'm consuming at this pace. Oh, we're running out. I would totally sign up for that.
I think the predictive nature of this is super important, right? It's what we're, focusing on when we talk about this AI era of advertising, is the importance of predictive messaging from brands to consumers and how AI can unlock that. So I agree that it should be possible and that that's where we're headed in the next 2 to 3 years. All right, well, let's move on. I bought a rug yesterday that I researched with AI, so I'm fully on board for this journey. Let's move on to U.S. economy and bank earnings. I did use a credit card for that rug purchase. Nidhi, you've been looking into this week. Why don't you kick us off with what we've learned and what we've heard so far?
Yeah, it's great to be starting the year with one of my favorite sectors, financial services. So we had 6 US banks report this week and really a mixed picture. Some reporting very strong growth in average loans, suggesting that business environment, consumer environment still remains resilient, as well as activity still being strong in 2025, supported by the fact that fee income for a lot of these banks has been increasing. I think one of the interesting facts, which I want to ask you, Brian, actually, what do you think was the advertising spend growth for 2025?
Total industry? Well, I'd say it was either 6 or 7%.
Are we still doing that?
So actually, for the 6 banks that reported, that was about 12.5% growth. That exceeded our expectations within TYY. We expected around 11.5% growth for the total industry. Now, obviously, we're waiting for a couple more players to report to be able to provide that fact. but really that growth exceeding total revenue growth of about 5.8% in 2025. And that share of advertising has remained stable. So it's very interesting if we compare to previous crisis where banks have had that of thinking about marketing and advertising in general as a way to cut when times get tough. But that hasn't been the case in 2025, where there's been uncertainty, challenging environment, advertising spend still growing, a lot of focus on balancing brand building with performance and more targeted media, leveraging that financial literacy and localization as well as sponsorship. So really interesting to see.
Well, one thing that I think would be most interesting to see how it plays out, and I haven't gone through the earnings call transcripts yet to see if they say anything. I suspect they didn't. But because credit card caps in the US might be a real thing, the fee limits, I think we have to presume that some of the policy suggestions actually do have a strong likelihood of coming to fruition in some form. That's the big driver, I think, of most advertising coming from the US banks, at least. And to the extent that credit cards become a much less profitable business, or alternately, the focus of the business goes into the high net worth or the mass affluence, which is a very competitive space. And I can't anticipate, and maybe you guys have a thought, will they focus more on events or more on non-media marketing like lounges or offers? Or will they focus much more on mass advertising, at least among a niche audience? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Definitely seen the competition heat up in the event space. I think, dueling lounges at events like the US Open in tennis, we've been keeping an eye on, right? So not all of those will show up into media spend. So it'll be an interesting, to your point, to see what of that increase goes into more experiential pieces rather than the straight media side. But I think with a big year in things like World Cup, Olympics, and policy avenues, you might see some targeting that's more closely tied to that piece of regulation, for sure.
Yeah, banks have also, over the last 6 or 8 years, they've moved down the funnel to more and more specific targeted formats. I think any of this kind of regulation is just going to exacerbate that, and you'll see search shares go way up as they have over the past few years.
One place they probably won't be playing straight away is in the AI space. I think those conversations that relate to financial services are going to be pretty locked down, at least to start, because it is so tightly regulated and because, I don't think they want AIs giving financial advice and dealing with the repercussions of that. So they're probably going to have to find some other avenues to start with. All right, other notes on the U.S. economy?
We see a really strong market on most dimensions, and it shouldn't be the case, right? The policies, as we see them from the current administration in the United States and influencing the rest of the world as a consequence, are mostly negative for economic activity, negative for business as we see it. And the risks are mounting. We don't see any near-term signs of negativity, and so we would characterize the current economy as strong despite policy choices that have been put in place. But the risks are mounting. And so we certainly advocate for those who care to hear any advocacy. If you're selling advertising, get your commitments ASAP. If you're buying advertising, wait as long as you humanly can. Because at the end of the day, things are strong right now, but we just don't expect this to persist.
I mean, there's been a lot more flexibility built into the media buying process, I think, running up to COVID, but especially after COVID, right? Things are just a very different market now in terms of the flexibility advertisers have when they make commitments, and especially as even things like TV shift to more and more digital formats, that becomes even more flexible. So I think in that sense, brands are well placed. I also think what last year showed us is that they're in it for the long haul. They are willing to stay the course. They understand the benefit of being in the market with evergreen messaging in front of consumers. And yes, there's going to be uncertainty. There's been uncertainty for the last 5 years. There will continue to be major uncertainty for the next 5 years. And it doesn't make a ton of sense to uproot, the entire marketing organization every time there's a whiff of something that may or may not pan out. And I think we've seen a lot of stuff not pan out. And I think marketers are more and more willing to work through uncertainty. And so I think we have this is a great conversation, right? We have a more positive outlook on the US economy this year because we think business will continue more akin to a normal rate than I think your prediction forecasts. Luke, anything to add, or Jeff?
I mean, we're still in this weak job. All actual hard economic data looks good. Everybody's constantly anxious that things are about to fall apart, but so far, no signs of it. I mean, economic data is inherently backwards looking, so probably by the time we have confirmation that job trajectory has deteriorated further or wholesale, retail, services sales have actually fallen apart, by then we'll all know from other signs and from the reaction of the stock market. But so far, so good.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think what we've been talking about a lot with the K-shaped economy that we're seeing across multiple markets, of course, not just the US. And I think, depending on where you sit in that K, you're going to have very different, feelings on your economic, security. So I think that might be a little harder to dice, especially if you're in a particular bubble or in a major city. It might experience a little bit different than other places. Like Luke mentioned, like what we're seeing in the economic data, everything seems to be humming along pretty well for the most part.
I think we only make the point that, again, unless everything that we've ever learned from studying, 150, 200 years worth of decent economic research, unless it's all wrong, we know where this ends, or at least we think we know where it ends. And unfortunately, the distinction between being early and being wrong is often indistinguishable. Consequently, you could be wrong for a while. We could be wrong for a while in terms of that negative view. But as it is, we certainly see right in front of us that things are strong. Now, we probabilistically or we probability weighted where we think the world plays out when it comes to the year ahead. We are saying as a base case, saner heads, cooler heads prevail, a willfully optimistic take. I think we have to recognize that it is, because evidence suggests something to the contrary, possibly, and maybe we got our own blinders on. So we do have to just be mindful of the meaningful risk to the downside without having necessarily risk to the upside. I think that that's unlikely, but it's way more likely to see downside risks than upside risks relative to a decent economy. But we are assuming that these policies that we have in place are stagflationary. When you have meaningful reductions to an employment base, when you have tariffs, when you have policies that favor access rather than, shall we say, economic merit, those sorts of things are destructive to capital. They're destructive to business. We just don't see it in the numbers at the present time.
Well, we mentioned what a big year for sport it is this year. I know I was one of the ones registering for Olympics tickets. That's in a couple of years, but we do have the Winter Olympics coming up. I think I saw a stat from the IOC that registrations for the first day of ticket sales at LA 2028 were more than Milan Cortina, which is the one coming up next month, Paris and Tokyo combined. So lots of interest. I think that's going to be a big, boost for the U.S. in 2028. Again, we don't typically see an Olympics boost. That's something that Brian and I have talked about for years. But because the U.S. is the host country and the U.S. represents such a large share of total industry revenue, I think we are going to see a little bit of a bump from that. TikTok was named World Cup Video Content Preferred Partner. Now, Fox still has the rights. So, Jeff, talk us through what that actually means.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It get a little confusing. So apparently TikTok reached an agreement to become the World Cup Video Content Preferred Partner. So that's the first of this type of deal, and it's a global deal. Now, where it gets a little confusing is in the US. This caught Fox a little bit off guard because under this deal, it would provide live look-ins into games, among many other things, giving creators access to behind the scenes and exclusive World Cup content. And of course, Fox in the US believed that they had the rights to sell to an individual online different platforms. So looks like a little bit of confusion, but it's interesting on a global scale, at least for TikTok, especially as the creator economy gets more and more buzz, more and more in the mainstream. I mean, it has been in the mainstream for a while, but I guess would this just sound like the natural evolution for TikTok to get more involved in sports and try to find any way to get involved in some of the biggest global events?
I think it just speaks to the continued erosion of TV's story as well. Of we have the best, most premium content. We have the live sports you're going to want. We have live events. And first we get NFL simulcast on Peacock. Well, that's still TV and that's simulcast. And then NFL on Thursday Night Football on Amazon. That's still kind of TV, but now the Oscars is going to be on YouTube. Now TikTok is having live World Cup events. It's clear that this trend only goes in one direction, and digital platforms are going to be the only ones affording future sports rights, and we're just going to see more and more moves in this direction.
My first reaction to hearing this is so much for the perceived influence that the Murdoch family would have over TikTok, right? Did we not remember that it was only months ago that there was all these concerns about, oh, well, the Murdochs are investing in the entity that's going to control TikTok USA. All this consortium of entities that is making the investment in this entity that's basically a data management platform business that really won't be anything terribly significant, probably, other than, it'll do a thing, it'll satisfy some law, but it really won't reflect any influence that any of the minority owners have in that business, because they'll be very, very separate.
Let me ask you this, Brian, because Nidhi did some great work on our team earlier this year around the creator economy. How are you viewing those direct dollars from brands into creators as a part of the broader universe that we cover, right?
We are behind and in envy of the fact that you guys have numbers out on this. We may have some of our own at some point soon. Clearly, we're seeing a lot of focus. I mean, from the vantage point that we're trying to study it, which is not from the marketer lens or the media, but mostly from the media owner lens, it's so important because it is siphoning money out. Now, we've done more thinking about it than actually producing data. So let's say we're working on vibes here. But what I would say is this. I'm fascinated by understanding what the most direct substitute is for money that's going into creators. In other words, what is directly funding it? Some conversations we've had on some of our other podcasts with folks in the PR community have suggested that maybe one of the reasons we're seeing a lot of weakness in the PR world is because that's actually the money that's funding creators. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on this topic, but because it's not as direct a flow between spend that would go to television, spots and dots, let alone online video, let alone CTV, let alone YouTube, the money that's funding that seems to be very different than the money that's going to creators. So when Unilever's out there saying 50% of their spend, whether that's aspirational or not, will go to creators, it's impossible to imagine that not pulling away from every part of their budget. But for the vast majority of marketers where it's going to be a much smaller share of the budget, again, if you use this framework that, again, on This Week, Next Week, we certainly would have talked about this idea that marketers always look for direct substitutes. If they're told they can't spend money on one place, they'll shift it to another. So you can't spend money on television. That doesn't mean you spend money on YouTube necessarily. You'll spend it on CTV, not YouTube. First. So in context of the substitutions that marketers are making to fund it, I just don't have a clear view about what's funding it. Do you guys have a view on that?
I mean, the PR angle is interesting, right? More akin to a spokesperson or a brand ambassador that you might fund out of something else that didn't look like media, which would also help explain why, we've still seen really healthy growth within the media revenue world, right? Even though creator is also growing. In your research into that, did you come up with anything else in terms of some of the sources?
Yeah, I think the definition of creators is also quite important, right? It's not just limited to a person on YouTube putting a video out. There's also the revenue side from people on podcasts and celebrities and a whole lot more. So that is also another component of it beyond social platforms, which is kind of gaining traction in terms of revenue. I think also it's important to note that with the creator economy, that growth obviously has been pretty high post-COVID. Naturally, a lot more people trying to create their own videos, and that space is becoming competitive as well in itself. It has its own challenges. So we do expect that growth to slow down, but definition has broadened. So it's that line again, Brian and Kate, those lines becoming very blurry as to what even is the whole definition and what that remit includes, not just PR, not just from the world's largest advertisers, but even just generally.
Yeah. I mean, at the point that everyone becomes a creator and everyone has their own place where they're broadcasting, who's there to listen? Like a reversal is like, if every tree in the forest falls down, does anyone hear it? Because all the trees have fallen together. There's no tree left standing to be an audience at any point.
True. We on our podcast, we have had sponsorships, and it's interesting to think about it. So technically we're like sort of creators. We're not. So I would actually shudder at the concept of it. But it's interesting to see it through the lens of okay, so people have much more scaled, more consumer focused podcasts, what the process is, what the budget is that they're competing for. We're obviously way more B2B focused than most podcasters would, or people with podcasts would be. But it does seem like as part of a broader marketing activity, funding creators can be part of that too. So, I mean, I didn't see any consumer electronics creators last week in Las Vegas, but I have to
Or were
imagine
they?
that if you were I assume they were, right? Yeah, I don't go to the trade floor. I leave that for you and Luke. But I have to assume that if you're a Samsung, a Sony, any electronics company, they must be thinking about funding the creators to highlight whatever new gear they have in context of their overall marketing activations, not straightforward media. If it was media, what they'd be doing is going to YouTube, buying spots and dots. They might be doing some audience extensions off of the creators, but not funding the creators themselves.
Yeah. In fact, I think one of the creator spaces was sponsored by Samsung. So that answers that question. All right. Well, let's move swiftly on from TikTok app to apps in general. I think your team, Madison Wall, has done some thinking this week on app advertising. I know I had conversations just last week on AppLovin, so I'm excited to dig into this one too.
Yeah, we've got LiftOff filed for IPO. So everyone's, of course, super interested in the app space because it's both clearly growing and also it's hard to dig into it. It's a bit of a black box for analysts. So our question is, what's the difference between a LiftOff and an AppLovin, given they have the same number of apps that are leveraging their service, given they have the same number of average users, they have the same number of advertisers that are using them, and yet AppLovin has nearly 10x the revenue? So it's a question of, is it being the mediation layer for controlling the auction? How important is seeing the total picture of the whole auction, all the data, downstream conversions? Is it servicing game advertising instead of entertainment or app verticals? There are a bunch of potential variables that speak to why they're businesses in different positions, but it'll be really interesting as we see it go public, as we get more of a look into LiftOff's business, to see what is the real lever for app profitability.
Yeah. Now, not to be considered financial advice, but I was having a chat with an analyst friend at CES talking about AppLovin and wondering how long that sort of gap was going to continue. I don't know. Is anyone on here? Does anyone play mobile casual games that gets ads from things like AppLovin and Unity? Okay. So I do on occasion if I'm unwinding in the evening, and the app experience is awful and it is gamed. So they force you to sit, if it's like a reward app for something in the game, they'll force you to sit through however many seconds and then they put up an X, but the X will often actually take you to the app store instead of Xing out of the ad. There are so many sort of dark pattern, I would argue, issues in this world of in-game mobile casual app advertising. They will tell you that the app you're currently using is no longer supported. Click to upgrade as a way to get you to download an app. So I'm just wondering if it's only a matter of time before regulation or brands or whoever it is kind of take a deeper look under the hood and realize that some of those metrics maybe aren't as rosy as they appear at first sight.
It's also fascinating to get insight into how consumers value these different experiences. So game consumers are clearly willing to tolerate a huge number of rewarded videos per minute of game time, and thinking about that versus signing up for the streaming no ads or ads version of a streaming platform, like get a sense for what is the elasticity to ads versus a $5 fee versus a $20 fee for different consumer touch points.
Yeah.
You're also hitting on something I think is really interesting around mobile gaming more generally. I mean, forever you'd hear arguments put forward that, oh, consumers spend so much time on games and therefore there should be so much advertising from general market advertisers. I mean, no, it doesn't follow. First of all, most gaming, it's interruptive to the experience to have an ad, especially when you bought the game. And if it's a free game, I mean, it's very low quality inventory for the most part, right?
Yeah, you'll get like 2x3-inch ads on a full tablet screen, for instance, right? I mean, I think we just for the first time in December released a gaming category for our numbers. We're saying there's going to be just over $10 billion, or close to $11 billion this year in gaming ad revenue, in-game ad revenue. That does not include things like Twitch, which we view as social video or with more like streaming and information and entertainment rather than in-game. But really the vast majority of that is going to be mobile casual. It's not going to be those premium experiences in console-driven games, for instance. Those, are often agreed with the developer way early in the cycle. They tend to be very heavy lift, hard to scale, right? In order to get that, it's not the same kind of unlock as a lot of digital formats that we see. Maybe it's like within a more premium environment, that ads monetization structure is not something that I think gamers have really gotten used to or are looking for. It's a very different environment, to your point, than TV, where people have always expected ads to some extent, at least if they grew up like all of us did in the era of, live linear TV with advertising. And so it's a very different thing to bring ads into that environment and as a monetization strategy. So there's the scale issue, there's some brand suitability issues, and then there's certainly the receptivity of gamers on those more premium platforms, which are holding back those more premium ad formats and advertisers, I think, within that space.
Full circle back to the conversation on agentic AI, retail media, essentially. The non-endemics, it doesn't make that much sense. But for endemic marketers, it does make a ton of sense. So you want to promote another casual game, you're most likely to find your next user from someone who already is consuming a casual game. And same on consoles. Other console games should be marketing on consoles. Absolutely. I just wonder I don't doubt that there's a market that's durable, but I think that the implied expectations when you look at an AppLovin for market cap, for example, is, and again, not a securities analyst anymore, not financial advice, difficult to imagine what one needs to believe to be true to justify the valuation, unless you believe that they're going to use their capital to go and invest in other things, to go and realize the potential that investors are implicitly saying they have the capacity to grow into.
Yeah, I can't get to the kind of growth numbers that we're looking at in terms of consensus estimates for that, but we'll see. I think that's it for the week. We always end, and this was something we started with this week, next week too. Brian, what are folks looking forward to the next week? Let's go around. We'll start with Nidhi.
Yeah, so we've got LVMH reporting next week. It'll be interesting to see how the year ends for them. We did notice a slowdown from the Chinese recovery and demand. So looking forward to that. And then some more inflation data from Europe and the UK as well.
Finally, kicking off earnings season, I guess. Going to get some insights into Q4 performance, which we expected continued to be pretty strong.
Yeah, I would say from a business side, Netflix coming up next week, which is crazy to think. And also from a personal standpoint, just watching the Netflix WBD Paramount drama unfold every week is probably the best thing on television, at least in my opinion. And then, of course, we have a really fun sports weekend with lots of football games.
Both sides want to do everything there except raise the offer.
Let's not forget about P&G, Procter & Gamble. I mean, again, it's not just that we live our lives around earnings, but we kind of do live our lives around earnings. And so we do really organize a lot of our time, as you guys do, I think, heavily around just when these companies release numbers, data, insights, it really just drives a cycle of activity. And half the time P&G says nothing useful, but half the time they actually say stuff that kind of catalyzes a lot of other things.
It's been really interesting the last couple of years to watch them start to talk more and more about their advertising intensity, which didn't used to be a number we got from them in terms of their advertising expense as a percent of revenue. But as that's become, I think, an even greater comparison point for analysts across the business, that extra insight into those figures from P&G, Unilever, Nestle has been really, really helpful to better understanding the marketplace. So kudos to any company that gives us more data rather than less. And I'm looking forward to catching up on The Pit, which is back for season 2 this year, something I'm watching. So excited for that. And long weekend, spend some time outside. We have great weather right here in California. Sorry, Jeff in New York. So some outside time away from the computer before earnings start. Well, thank you so much for listening to the joint production of the WPP Media Intelligence Podcast and Madison and Wall. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you have any questions for our show, you can email us at business.intelligence@wppmedia.com. wpmedia.com. You can find Brian and Luke on their podcast called Madison Wall, wherever you get your podcasts. And as a final reminder, the Media Intelligence podcast from WPP Media is meant for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll do it again.
Thanks for having us. This was fun.
The views of Madison and Wall do not represent the opinions of WPP or WPP Media.